news today? Oh, I feel
Yes, well, as slippery as your mind.
was first in line until the little hairball. Oh, I shall practice my curtsy. You shouldn't turn your back on me. Dream of challenging you. Pity when it comes to brute strength.
There's one in...
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ali Sprotus channel. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the content. Today, we are going to be discussing the film The Lion King from 1994. The African sun beat down upon the Pride Lands, a place of vibrant life soon to welcome a new heir. We see the great circle of life celebrated as Rafiki, the wise mandrill whose spiritual connection to the land rivals the shamanistic roles seen in classic tales of wise hermits, presents the newborn Simba atop Pride Rock. This young cub, destined for kingship, is the son of Mufasa, a ruler whose quiet strength and deep understanding of his domain much like a seasoned stage actor commanding the attention of the entire audience, earned the respect of every creature. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, shadows stirred. Scar, Mufasa's younger brother, watched the ceremony with thinly veiled bitterness. Scar, whose theatrical flair and sharp, often acidic wit suggest a frustrated Shakespearean villain perpetually relegated to supporting roles, harbored deep resentment. His perceived neglect fueled a dangerous ambition, an envy that mirrored the internal struggles often explored in works by playwrights focusing on sibling rivalry. As Simba grows, his youthful energy often leads him into minor mischief, much to the chagrin of Zazu, the perpetually flustered hornbill majordomo, whose stiff formality recalls the meticulous, bureaucratic characters in political satires. Mufasa, ever the patient mentor, teaches Simba about the true weight of leadership, explaining that a king's domain encompasses even the shadows, the dangerous places beyond their borders. Simba, full of the boundless optimism of youth, is fascinated by these stories, especially tales of the legendary elephant graveyard, a forbidden zone. Driven by a desire to impress his uncle, who paradoxically courts the cub's attention while plotting his downfall, Simba ventures into the graveyard with Nala, his spirited friend. Here, they encounter the hyenas, a menacing crew whose scavenging nature mirrors the opportunistic opportunists often depicted in gritty urban dramas. Scar, having orchestrated the encounter, uses the hyenas to nearly trap the cubs, forcing Mufasa to intervene dramatically. Mufasa's swift, powerful rescue showcases the raw, untamed authority of a true alpha, reminiscent of the heroic climaxes in epic adventure films. The true tragedy unfolds later. Scar lures a young Simba into a deep gorge, promising an exciting spectacle. He collaborates with the hyenas to unleash a stampede of wildebeest. Mufasa races to save his son, an act of pure, selfless sacrifice. After saving Simba, Mufasa attempts to climb out of the ravine, only to be betrayed by Scar, who whispers encouragement before casting him into the torrent of hooves. Scar then convinces the traumatized Simba that his recklessness caused his father's death, successfully driving the guilt-ridden cub away from the Pride Lands. Simba flees into exile. His journey of despair leads him to a lush oasis where he collapses, only to be discovered by Timon and Pumbaa, a meerkat and a warthog duo whose philosophy of carefree living, a stark contrast to the rigid responsibilities of royal life, perfectly captures the escapism often sought by disillusioned protagonists in buddy comedies. They introduce him to Hakuna Matata, a motto that allows Simba to bury his past and grow into a powerful but aimless young adult, his regal bearing hidden beneath a veneer of tropical apathy. Years pass. The Pride Lands wither under the tyrannical, wasteful rule of Scar, who blames the lions for everything while exploiting the hyenas and depleting the resources, a clear commentary on short-sighted governance. Back at the oasis, a grown Simba is confronted by Nala, who has fled the dying kingdom in search of help. Her rediscovery of the lost prince sparks old memories and a renewed sense of duty in Simba. Though he initially resists the call, the pivotal moment arrives when Rafiki finds Simba. Through a spiritual encounter mirroring the mystical awakenings common in mythological hero journeys, Rafiki helps Simba connect with Mufasa's spirit, reminding him that his father lives within him. Simultaneously, the winds of the savannah carry the echoes of his past failures and future obligations. Shaken from his complacency, Simba returns to the devastated Pride Lands, finding Nala and his old friends engaged in a hopeless struggle against Scar and the hyenas. The ensuing confrontation is raw and emotional. Simba finally faces his uncle atop Pride Rock. Scar, cornered, attempts the same manipulation he used years before, blaming the hyenas for Mufasa's death. But Simba, now possessing the authority and wisdom his father embodied, reveals the truth to the assembled pride. Scar murdered Mufasa. In the ensuing chaos as the land begins to burn, Simba defeats Scar, delivering a final, just judgment fitting for the rightful king. With the usurper gone and the hyenas scattered, Simba takes his place on Pride Rock. The rains return, washing away the grime of Scar's reign. The circle of life is restored, culminating in the presentation of Simba's own cub, bringing the cycle of life, loss, and redemption to its rightful, triumphant close under the revitalized African sun. The weight of that presentation on Pride Rock, that very first moment Simba was shown to the world, carried an almost palpable sense of destiny, a hush falling over the gathered animals that spoke volumes about the enduring tradition of monarchy. Mufasa, the picture of leonine nobility, held himself with an innate grace, the kind that doesn't need to be learned in a classroom, but is absorbed through years of responsible stewardship. His voice, when he addressed his subjects, carried the gravitas of a veteran orator who understands the power of measured silence as much as forceful declaration. Scar, however, was the master of the dramatic aside. His movements were always a touch too fluid, his pronouncements dripping with an affected theatricality that suggested he was rehearsing for a role he was constantly being denied. His eyes, often half-lidded, seemed perpetually calculating the angles, a study in simmering resentment. He didn't just walk, he slinked, embodying the archetype of the disgruntled understudy observing the star from the wings. His dialogue, often laced with sardonic humor, was the verbal equivalent of a well-aimed dagger, designed to chip away at the confidence of those around him. Simba's youth was characterized by an unbridled, almost reckless curiosity. When Mufasa spoke of the shadows beyond the borders, the necessity of keeping even the unwelcome parts of the kingdom in mind, it sounded less like a warning and more like an invitation to an unexplored stage. This tendency to rush into the spotlight, to seek immediate validation, was what made him susceptible to Scar's manipulation. Scar didn't need to invent evil. He merely had to frame an adventure as a test of masculinity, a way to prove oneself worthy in Mufasa's eyes. The stampede itself was chaos distilled into pure, primal fear. The sound was overwhelming, a geological event moving across the plain. Mufasa's ascent from the churning dust, his desperate reach for his son, was the ultimate expression of paternal commitment, a selfless act that transcended mere instinct. It was leadership defined by sacrifice, the highest form of dramatic commitment an actor can give to a role. Scar's whisper in the gorge, that final cruel push, was the ultimate betrayal, a villain not just murdering the hero, but poisoning the hero's memory of him, ensuring the resulting guilt would be the most effective prison. Simba's flight into the desert was a symbolic stripping away of identity. He shed the mantle of prince for the anonymity of the hunted. Timon and Pumbaa, with their aggressively cheerful demeanor and philosophy of avoidance, served as the perfect balm for a wounded soul too traumatized to face responsibility. Their existence was a continuous, improvisational musical number, a deliberate rejection of the structured, demanding score of royal life. For years, Simba lived as an understudy to nothing, allowing his natural strength to mature in the absence of expectation, yet his posture never quite lost the echo of the royal bearing he inherited. When Nala found him, her arrival was abrupt and jarring, a sudden intrusion of reality into their tropical fantasy. Her desperation, the visible decay of the Pride Lands reflected in her own gaunt appearance, was the necessary catalyst. She didn't plead, she confronted, treating the adult Simba not as a prince, but as a derelict youth who had abandoned his post. This forced reckoning is the classic turning point where the protagonist must choose between comfortable delusion and painful truth. Rafiki's intervention was not merely guidance, it was a forceful spiritual excavation. In the shimmering heat and the ghostly vision of Mufasa, the message was clear. Heritage is not something you can outrun, it is etched into your very being. Mufasa's spectral voice, resonating with the wisdom of ages, served as the voice of the ancestral authority, demanding Simba reclaim his narrative. The final battle on Pride Rock was not just a fight for territory, but a struggle for narrative control. Scar, in his desperate final moments, tried one last time to cast himself as the victim, pointing fingers, but Simba, now standing in the light of his father's legacy, refused to play the scapegoat. When the truth was spoken, it rang out with an undeniable authority, confirming that true power doesn't roar loudest. It simply speaks with the conviction of undeniable truth, finally silencing the discordant, jealous monologue that Scar had imposed upon the land for so long. The subsequent return of life to the plains felt earned, a true curtain call after a necessary, painful performance of restoration. The atmosphere on Pride Rock during Simba's return was thick with palpable tension, a stark contrast to the lush serenity of his exile. The few remaining lions who had stayed, clinging to a desperate hope, moved with the weary resignation of a cast whose main performers have long since abandoned the stage. Their hope was a fragile thing, easily extinguished by Scar's constant tyranny, a reign marked by a chilling lack of true leadership, relying instead on fear and the brute force of the emboldened hyenas. Scar himself, in these waning days, had lost the sharp, calculating glint that once defined him. He had become bloated with power and paranoia, his every pronouncement brittle, sounding less like a king and more like a desperate man clinging to a collapsing set piece. Simba's first moments back in the desolated territory were jarring. The smell of dust and decay replaced the sweet, damp earth of his childhood memories. Seeing Nala again, the shared history and unspoken sorrow between them created an immediate emotional anchor, a silent declaration that the path of duty, however painful, was the only one forward. Her resilience, born from fighting for scraps in a dying land, mirrored the fierce tenacity often required of leading figures in historical dramas facing siege. The confrontation with Scar was inevitable, a dramatic climax where all subplots must resolve. As the fight erupted, it was clear that Scar was fighting with the frantic energy of a thief caught mid-heist, relying on deceit and surprise. When Simba finally pinned his uncle, the silence that fell over the assembled animals was absolute, a collective holding of breath before the verdict. Scar's final, desperate act, to betray his own accomplices, was the ultimate unraveling of his character, exposing the cowardice beneath the veneer of Machiavellian brilliance. He wasn't a tragic villain of grand ambition, he was merely a petty liar. Simba's refusal to kill Scar outright, choosing instead to banish him, spoke volumes about his transformation. It was not vengeance he sought, but restoration of order, demonstrating a wisdom far exceeding the fiery temperament of his youth. This measured response signaled a king who understood that true power lies in mercy, tempered by justice, a nuanced approach that marked him as a true successor to Mufasa's measured rule. The rain, when it finally came, was more than just weather. It was a symbolic cleansing, a narrative baptism washing away the sins of the past regime. The earth, having endured a prolonged drought of good governance, drank deeply, promising rebirth. Watching Simba stand on Pride Rock, no longer the cub overwhelmed by guilt or the young adult hiding from responsibility, but a mature sovereign, was the satisfying resolution of a long simmering narrative arc. The collective roar of the pride as the sun broke through the clouds was the sound of the world settling back into its natural, necessary rhythm, a powerful testament to the cyclical nature of life that transcends any single generation. The immediate aftermath of Scar's defeat and exile saw a profound shift in the ecosystem of the Pride Lands, a slow but steady march toward recovery, mirroring the arduous process of rebuilding a nation after civil strife. Simba, now fully embracing his royal mantle, spent his early reign not in pomp, but in diligent repair, understanding that true kingship, as his father had taught him, involved tending to every corner of the realm. He walked the borders, not with the proud swagger of a conqueror, but with the careful inspection of a seasoned agriculturalist assessing damage after a harsh season. The lionesses, bolstered by Nala's unwavering spirit and Simba's renewed commitment, took the lead in reclaiming hunting grounds, their movements filled with a purposeful energy that had been absent for so long. Rafiki remained a steadfast, if enigmatic, presence, moving through the rejuvenated savannah with his gourd and staff, his pronouncements often cryptic but always grounding. He served as a living link to the ancestral wisdom, ensuring that the new generation understood the delicate balance they were re-establishing. Even Zazu, the fastidious hornbill, seemed to shed some of his nervous rigidity, his organizational skills now channeled into more constructive, less anxiety-driven efforts, perhaps finding a sense of purpose in the massive logistical undertaking of ecological restoration. Timon and Pumbaa, the unlikely saviors, found themselves unexpectedly celebrated. Their philosophy of effortless living was momentarily tolerated, even admired, by the recovering populace, though Simba gently steered them toward areas where their unique skills, perhaps in pest control or morale boosting, could contribute without undermining the strict new emphasis on responsibility. They remained the embodiment of comic relief, necessary to prevent the return to solemnity from becoming too suffocating, a reminder that joy is as vital to a healthy kingdom as discipline. The ultimate affirmation of this new era came when the first rains gave way to robust new growth, painting the plains in shades of green that had been sorely missed. Pride Rock itself seemed to stand taller, cleansed of the shadow it had endured. The final, deeply poignant moment, the presentation of Simba and Nala's new cub, echoed the opening scene, but carried the weight of hard-won experience. It was a celebration not just of birth, but of continuity, a visual promise that the lessons learned through tragedy and exile would not be forgotten. The circle had indeed turned, not merely returning to where it began, but achieving a higher, more conscious state of existence, founded on memory and redeemed purpose. The sight of the new cub, held aloft against the newly vibrant sky, was a moment heavy with generational dialogue. It was an unspoken message passed from Mufasa, through Simba, to the next heir. Respect the balance, for the whispers of darkness never truly vanish. Simba felt the warmth of the sun on his back, a physical manifestation of the kingdom's acceptance, yet there was a subtle sobriety in his posture that hadn't been there in his youth. He carried the knowledge of the gorge, the memory of Scar's desperate treachery, not as a burden, but as the very foundation of his authority. True leadership is forged in surviving betrayal. Nala stood beside him, her eyes reflecting not just the joy of motherhood, but the deep satisfaction of seeing their shared struggle culminate in this tranquil resurgence. Her pragmatic strength had been the necessary force that pulled him from his apathy, proving that partnership is the true bedrock of a stable throne. Even the hyenas, now banished and scattered to the outer edges of the kingdom, served a narrative purpose. Their failure underscored the necessity of unity among the prides. Their chaotic, insatiable greed was the perfect counterpoint to the ordered, sustainable life the lions now championed. Their absence was palpable in the quiet efficiency of the new order, a constant, unspoken reminder of the cost of anarchy. As the celebration settled into a gentle hum of contented life, Simba looked out over the expanse. He was no longer the naive prince seeking easy thrills, nor the guilt-ridden exile running from accountability. He embodied the seasoned ruler whose performance is flawless, precisely because the stakes are perpetually real. The landscape itself seemed to breathe easier, the colors deeper, the shadows less threatening because they were now acknowledged and understood as part of the whole, not as hiding places for usurpers. The entire presentation felt less like a crowning ceremony and more like a solemn recommitment to the unending stewardship of the Pride Lands, a quiet, powerful affirmation of life's enduring capacity for renewal after even the deepest winter. The transition from the intense drama of the climax to this quiet affirmation of peace was seamless, much like the transition from a thunderous orchestral movement to a gentle, lingering pianissimo. Simba often found himself pausing during his rounds, observing the smaller creatures, the insects thriving in the damp earth, the antelope grazing tentatively near the rejuvenated waterholes, and recognizing in their simple existence the profound truth his father had tried to impart. Every life, no matter how small, contributes to the overall score. This deep appreciation for detail, for the quiet mechanics of the ecosystem, was a crucial refinement of his kingship, one born from the near loss of everything. Nala, whose spirit was as resilient as the tough grasses that now returned to the plains, often accompanied him, her presence a steadying force. She was the grounded counterpoint to his more regal, sometimes contemplative nature. Where Simba now looked at the horizon, searching for threats or patterns of balance, Nila observed the immediate needs, the communal sharing of resources, the training of the younger generation of hunters. She was the unseen administrator whose meticulous efforts ensured the splendor on Pride Rock was reflected in the daily lives of the subjects. Her dedication recalled the steadfast, hard-working figures in epic narratives who truly hold the society together, while the recognized heroes manage the grand pronouncements. Zazu, surprisingly, found a new vein of professionalism by documenting the recovery. His detailed reports, painstakingly etched onto broad leaves by a surprisingly adept woodpecker liaison, chronicled the precise return of species and the health of the various territories. This meticulous cataloging, while still delivered with characteristic nervous fussiness, evidenced a genuine investment in the land's prosperity, a departure from his former role as mere court messenger. He had evolved from a bureaucratic annoyance to an essential chronicler of history in the making. And even Timon and Pumbaa, while still enjoying their well-earned status as honorary figures, exhibited a noticeable softening around the edges. They still adhered to Hakuna Matata, but now it was less an ideology of escape and more a celebration of surviving hardship. They understood, perhaps subconsciously, that their philosophy only truly works when there is a stable kingdom, a Simba, to keep the hyenas and chaos at bay. Their presence was a constant, light-hearted reminder to the court that peace, however hard-won, should be enjoyed with genuine, unreserved gusto, preventing the new regime from becoming overly self-serious or distant from the simple joys of life that sustained the common creature. The circle continued to turn, enriched by the knowledge that darkness was always a possibility, and vigilance was the true price of the magnificent, sunlit dawn they now shared. The lineage established, the focus subtly shifted from the epic drama of usurpation and return to the enduring everyday demands of governance. Simba, now fully inhabiting the role of the wise sovereign, began to understand that the most challenging part of leadership wasn't facing down a villain, but maintaining the equilibrium day after day, season after season. His days became structured around consultations with the elders, the lionesses who had held the line, and thoughtful engagement with the wider animal community. He sought wisdom not just from Rafiki's spiritual pronouncements, but from the practical knowledge of the grazers and browsers, recognizing that the health of the entire food web was his responsibility. This inclusive approach marked a significant departure from the more centralized authority of Mufasa's time, suggesting a modernizing monarch sensitive to the complexities of interspecies relations. Nala, in her partnership, championed initiatives focused on resource management, particularly the equitable distribution of water during the drier periods that inevitably returned, testing the kingdom's newfound stability. Her strength wasn't in roaring commands, but in quiet, persuasive negotiation, ensuring that the lioness's needs were met without unduly stressing the vulnerable herds. Her legacy, Simba knew, would be defined by the peace she helped sustain, often behind the scenes. The very landscape seemed to respond to this careful stewardship. The seeds of true prosperity were sown in the meticulous weeding out of Scar's lingering mismanagement, clearing obstructed water sources, encouraging natural migration routes, and ensuring that the hyenas, though kept at bay, were never completely annihilated, a pragmatic acknowledgement that nature abhors a vacuum, and perfect eradication often breeds new, unforeseen problems. Even the relationship with the Pride Rock itself seemed to deepen. Simba would often sit alone on the precipice, gazing at the vast expanse, no longer searching for his father's ghost, but rather communing with the land's inherent continuity. It was a quiet, profound moment of acceptance. He was no longer merely the prince fulfilling a destiny, but the present manifestation of the Pride Land's ongoing story, ensuring that the vibrant, precarious beauty of life on the savannah would continue to unfold for generations yet to be born. The performance was over. The long, steady act of reigning had begun. The continuation of this stable reign brought a subtle, almost philosophical shift in the court dynamics. The high-stakes theatrics of revolution gave way to the nuanced complexities of long-term policy. Simba, recognizing the potential for complacency now that the immediate threat was neutralized, focused heavily on education, ensuring that his heir and the cubs of the other lionesses were thoroughly drilled in the lessons learned from Scar's brief, destructive tenure. These lessons were often taught through historical narratives, cautionary tales delivered with the gravity of historical accounts detailing fallen empires, stories emphasizing that tyranny springs from internal corrosion as much as external attack. Nala proved invaluable in shaping the young royal curriculum, emphasizing empathy and ecological awareness over mere martial prowess. She ensured that the young princes and princesses understood the interconnectedness of predator and prey, often taking them on supervised excursions to observe the herds, an experience designed to inoculate them against the arrogance of absolute power. Her influence shaped a new generation of leaders who valued diplomacy and deep ecological understanding as much as raw strength. Zazu, thrilled by the official institutionalization of record-keeping, discovered a passion for archival science. He meticulously organized the growing body of knowledge regarding resource yields and population health, treating each dried leaf scroll as a historical artifact. His meticulousness, once a source of mild irritation, became the backbone of the kingdom's strategic planning, allowing Simba to anticipate environmental shifts rather than merely reacting to them. He found, perhaps for the first time, that true adherence to protocol served a noble purpose beyond simply placating a nervous king. Even Timon and Pumbaa found meaningful engagement in this new structure. Their ability to connect with the common, non-royal population became an unexpected asset. When minor localized disputes arose, say between a clan of baboons and a troop of monkeys over territory near a fruitful baobab, Timon and Pumbaa were often sent as surprisingly effective, non-threatening mediators. Their Hakuna Matata ethos, when presented as a call for non-escalation and finding the path of least resistance, proved surprisingly effective in diffusing petty squabbles, providing a flexible counterpoint to Simba's more stately judicial decisions. They became, essentially, the informal diplomats of the plains, ensuring that the small stresses did not accumulate into large cracks in the kingdom's foundation. The stability was no longer just about avoiding disaster. It was about actively cultivating widespread, resilient contentment. The patina of time settled gently upon the Pride Lands, smoothing the sharp edges of recent trauma. Simba and Nala, now seasoned monarchs, moved with the practiced synchronicity of performers who have long mastered their roles, their every gesture imbued with quiet authority rather than forced theatricality. The younger generation, growing up under their watchful, balanced reign, lacked the haunted tension that had defined Simba's own adolescence. They inherited the plains as a birthright maintained through diligence, not conquest. There was a noticeable absence of the grand, sweeping pronouncements that had characterized Mufasa's earlier reign, or the frantic, panicked speeches delivered by Scar. Simba's communication style leaned toward the concise, the practical, reflecting the hard-won wisdom that brevity often conveys the greatest weight. He addressed his court not as a divine figure, but as the chief steward, emphasizing collective effort. Nala, meanwhile, began to cultivate a distinct legacy rooted in sustainable development. She initiated careful rotation plans for the prime grazing lands, working closely with the herbivores to model rotational grazing patterns that mimicked natural cycles, a sophisticated ecological strategy that prevented the land from ever falling into the depleted state Scar had induced. Her quiet determination often meant spending nights monitoring water reserves rather than attending stately functions, cementing her reputation as the indispensable partner whose practical governance ensured the kingdom's material well-being. Rafiki, observing these developments, would occasionally offer a knowing smile. His role had subtly transformed from shamanistic guide to philosophical commentator on the enduring nature of true kingship. He saw in Simba not a carbon copy of Mufasa, but an evolved ruler, one who had integrated the necessary darkness of loss into his own light, making his reign ultimately more resilient. The mandrill understood that genuine cyclical renewal required not just the return of the hero, but the internalization of the hero's painful journey. Even the memory of Scar seemed to recede, softening from a terrifying villain into a cautionary tale murmured to the youngest cubs, a necessary shadow to define the immense value of the light. The Pride Lands had achieved a state of dynamic equilibrium, a peaceful narrative sustained not by dramatic victories, but by the quiet, unglamorous, and perpetual commitment to balance, a testament to a leadership matured through fire and tempered by responsibility. The decades flowed onward, the sun setting and rising over the Pride Lands with dependable rhythm. Simba, his mane now touched with the distinguished silver of a long-serving ruler, often found himself gazing back toward the horizon where his exile had ended, less with regret and more with profound gratitude for the circuitous route his life had taken. He was no longer defined by his youthful impulsiveness, but by the quiet authority etched into the lines around his eyes, the look of a king who has seen the abyss and chosen to build steadfastly away from it. His physical presence, while still immensely powerful, was tempered by an almost paternal gentleness toward his subjects, a reflection of the hard-won understanding that true strength lies in restraint. Nila, aging with a regal grace that rivaled her prime, became the living embodiment of the kingdom's wisdom. She seldom needed to speak in council. Her presence alone commanded respect, a silent affirmation that pragmatism and compassion were the keys to longevity in leadership. She transitioned into the role of chief matriarch, her influence extending far beyond the immediate royal circle, mentoring the future leaders of the lionesses in the subtle arts of diplomacy and resource forecasting. She carried the history of the Pride Lands in her bearing, a silent history of survival and rebirth. The greatest legacy, perhaps, was the complete integration of Timon and Pumbaa into the fabric of the court. They were no longer curiosities, but fixtures. Timon, surprisingly, became a master of logistics for the smaller communities. His flair for theatrical presentation now used to organize annual harvest festivals, ensuring the non-predator populations felt their contributions were duly recognized and celebrated. Pumbaa, naturally gentle, became an unexpected champion for the marginalized. The slower, the weaker, the creatures often overlooked in the harsh calculus of the savannah. Their continued, genuine friendship with Simba served as a daily, visible testament that the circle of life embraced all philosophies, provided they were rooted in kindness. Rafiki, finally, began to reduce his appearances, signifying a profound shift. His spiritual counsel became less about immediate crisis intervention and more about gentle periodic blessings. On one of his final public appearances, he pointed not to the future cub, but to the vast, ancient baobab tree standing near the watering hole, declaring that the true circle of life wasn't a continuous ring, but an ever-branching network, stronger for every connection made, every lesson integrated. His departure was not marked by sorrow, but by the satisfaction of a teacher seeing his most difficult pupil finally surpass the need for instruction. The Pride Lands were secure, not because the dangers had disappeared, but because the rulers had finally learned how to live beautifully, responsibly, within the constant tension of existence. The lasting peace settled over the Pride Lands like a warm, thick blanket woven from decades of careful management and mutual respect. Simba, now a venerable king, often found his greatest satisfaction not in the formal decrees issued from Pride Rock, but in the quiet moments observing the landscape humming with organic vitality. The sheer abundance, the lack of that gnawing fear that had haunted his youth, spoke volumes about the success of the sustained effort. He had learned that a reign is not measured by the roar of the coronation, but by the silence of a satisfied citizenry. His movements had slowed, possessing the deliberate weight of a man who knows exactly where every step must land, a contrast to the impulsive leaps of his early life. Nala, her eyes still sharp with intelligence, but softened by years of shared experience, had become the kingdom's quiet memory bank. She was the living embodiment of the lessons learned in exile and the subsequent struggle for reclamation. When young cubs, full of that familiar, dangerous curiosity, asked about the dark times, it was Nala who recounted the tale, framing Scar not as a monster, but as a cautionary example of unchecked ego, a necessary, albeit tragic, part of their history that illuminated the value of collaboration. Her legacy was written in the flourishing secondary growth areas and the balanced predator-prey ratios she meticulously oversaw. Zazu, having outlived several generations of advisors, had achieved a state of near-perfect organizational nirvana. His records were legendary, cross-referenced and indexed with such Byzantine detail that the kingdom could effectively predict rainfall patterns years in advance based on historical data. He had transformed from a nervous court functionary into the essential archivist of the kingdom's prosperity, his occasional squawk now expressing pride rather than panic. He understood that the truly powerful story was the one that could be proven with verifiable facts. Timon and Pumbaa, too, had found their niche in this mature society. Their adopted philosophy, once a shield against reality, had matured into a philosophy of joyful stewardship. They became the kingdom's morale officers, their irreverent humor the necessary antidote to the solemnity of royal duty. When local disputes flared, they were dispatched not as judges, but as negotiators focused solely on achieving immediate, practical harmony, understanding that sometimes a shared, slightly absurd meal together was more effective than any royal decree. They represented the successful integration of the periphery into the core, proving that even those who choose to live outside the traditional structure can contribute invaluable light. As Simba looked out one evening, the setting sun painting the plains in hues of triumph and peace, he realized the circle of life wasn't a static loop to be guarded, but a constantly evolving narrative. He had not simply returned to his father's throne, he had built upon it, integrating the lessons of running away, the strength of friendship, and the pain of betrayal into a unique, durable form of kingship. The land breathed easy, and in that collective sigh of contentment, Simba finally found the deepest, most enduring peace, the quiet triumph of a life fully and authentically lived in service to the savannah. The final act of Simba's long reign was characterized by a profound sense of completeness, a tapestry woven from threads of hardship and enduring love. The majesty of Pride Rock seemed less about overwhelming dominance and more about enduring stability, a mountain anchoring the shifting plains below. Simba's final years were spent in quiet mentorship, patiently guiding the new generation, his own grandchildren, vibrant and untroubled, through the topography of responsibility. He emphasized not the grand battles he had won, but the small daily acts of integrity that sustained the peace. Nala, now bearing the weight of many seasons with effortless dignity, often sat beside him, their shared silence richer than any youthful dialogue. Their companionship had become a legendary partnership, the perfect balance between the fiery passion of destiny and the cool logic of long-term care. She would sometimes gently chide him when he became too lost in historical reflection, nudging him toward the immediate present, reminding him that the future relied on today's vigilance. Her touch was a tangible connection to the earth, a reminder that even kings must remain rooted. Zazu, having completed his comprehensive historical archives, a collection so thorough it even cross-referenced Scar's increasingly erratic dietary patterns, finally allowed himself a measure of quiet retirement. He entrusted the ongoing record-keeping to a particularly astute young secretary bird, accepting the role of esteemed consultant. His final pronouncements were less about imminent danger and more about congratulating the kingdom on its statistical improbability of sustained peace, delivered with the satisfaction of a meticulously executed bureaucratic process. As for Timon and Pumbaa, they had transcended their outsider status to become living legends, symbols of unconventional loyalty. They were granted a small permanent patch of prime, bug-rich territory just outside the formal hunting boundaries, a sovereign sanctuary where their philosophy could thrive undisturbed. They were honored guests at every major gathering, their cheerful irreverence a vital check against any creeping pomposity within the royal court. Their enduring, uncomplicated love for Simba was perhaps the purest articulation of the circle of life, not just the consumption and rebirth of flesh, but the inclusion of diverse, necessary spirits. When the time finally came for Simba to take his final, deserved rest, it was under the gaze of a kingdom that no longer needed saving, but merely needed continuation. His final moments were not marked by fear or struggle, but by a peaceful ascent towards the star-dusted sky, a reunion with the spectral wisdom of Mufasa. The pride did not roar in grief, but offered a deep, measured breath of acknowledgement. The new sovereign, his heir, stepped forward, not with the heavy burden of reclaiming a lost throne, but with the steady confidence of inheriting a well-tended garden. The narrative had concluded its arc. The prince who fled the spotlight returned to become the steady, unshakable center of his world, proving that the greatest performance is the one that seamlessly blends into the natural, beautiful rhythm of life itself. The transition to the new reign, overseen by Simba's matured heir, was characterized by an atmosphere of inherited reverence rather than frantic aspiration. The weight of Simba's legend, the dramatic return, the decisive victory, the decades of steady prosperity, was a high standard, yet the successor carried it not as a crushing burden, but as a foundational blueprint. There was no need for a dramatic, sweeping reclamation. The focus was on refinement, on tuning the already excellent instrument that Simba and Nala had perfected. The young king or queen, the narrative allowing for the fluidity of the new era, possessed an innate understanding of balance, having been raised under the shadow of the near catastrophe. Nala, in her final, elevated status as Queen Mother, became the living repository of context. She rarely offered direct orders, instead providing anecdotes, small, poignant vignettes of the drought, the dust, Scar's desperate final moments, that served as far more potent cautionary tales than any abstract lecture. Her wisdom was gentle, laced with the weariness of one who has seen the pinnacle and the pit, lending her counsel an undeniable, unassailable authority. When she looked upon the new ruler, her eyes held a quiet, tearless pride, acknowledging that the survival of the lineage was her ultimate victory. Zazu, now a venerable elder himself, had formalized his historical accounts into the annals of the restored era, bound in the toughest acacia bark. He had found his ultimate purpose in ensuring that the why of the piece was never forgotten. He would often host small formal readings for the court, projecting the statistics of environmental recovery with the passion of a poet reciting epic verse. His rigidity had softened into methodical dedication. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by the calm focus of a scholar safeguarding sacred texts. Timon and Pumbaa, their relationship with the monarchy now completely familial, often served as the unofficial ambassadors to the wilder fringes of the kingdom. They were the bridge between the structured civility of Pride Rock and the untamed spirit of the savannah. Timon, armed with surprising rhetorical flair, could charm reluctant border clans into compliance, while Pumbaa's genuine, open-hearted nature diffused tensions simply by his presence. They proved that diplomacy didn't always require sharp teeth or grand pronouncements. Sometimes, it just required two honest friends who knew how to laugh when things got serious. They represented the enduring truth that true loyalty often blossoms outside the traditional boundaries of hierarchy. The entire kingdom moved forward with a sense of quiet confidence, a collective understanding that the great trials were over, replaced by the lifelong commitment to maintenance. The cycle continued, not as a dramatic return to the beginning, but as a sophisticated evolution, where the scars of the past served only to strengthen the sinews of the present. The new era was defined by the deep, resonant peace that only comes after a storm has been weathered not just bravely, but intelligently. The 1994 animation, The Lion King, transcends its classification as a mere children's feature, offering a complex tapestry of themes centered on duty, exile, and the inexorable cycle of life. Its narrative, often likened to a Shakespearean tragedy transplanted to the African savanna, draws heavily from Hamlet, centering on the usurpation of a just king by a jealous, ambitious relative. Mufasa, voiced with resonant authority by James Earl Jones, embodies the ideal sovereign, a figure deeply connected to the natural world, understanding the delicate balance of the Pride Lands. Jones's distinguished career, marked by gravitas and profound vocal presence, lends immediate weight to his philosophical pronouncements on the circle of life, establishing a foundational ethical framework for the entire ecosystem. The tragic fulcrum of the story is Simba's descent into exile, precipitated by the machinations of Scar, whose villainy is etched not only in his actions, but in the brilliant vocal performance by Jeremy Irons. Irons, renowned for his calculated theatrical villainy, a skill honed in roles ranging from Die Hard with a Vengeance to his stage work, infuses Scar with a serpentine intelligence and simmering resentment. His envy is a potent motivator, representing the corrupting influence of unchecked personal desire over communal responsibility. Simba's journey into self-imposed exile is crucial for his development from an impetuous cub to a responsible adult. His time with Timon and Pumbaa, voiced by Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella, provides necessary comic relief, but also explores the seductive pull of escapism. Their philosophy of Hakuna Matata, no worries, is a temporary antidote to trauma, allowing Simba the space to grieve and grow physically, but ultimately proving insufficient for true kingship, which demands engagement with pain and responsibility. This period echoes the mythological structure of the hero's journey, where the hero must undergo trials in an unfamiliar land before reclaiming their birthright. The animation itself was groundbreaking. The scale achieved in rendering the Pride Rock ceremonies and the terrifying majesty of the wildebeest stampede demonstrated a new pinnacle for hand-drawn artistry married with nascent computer-generated imagery. The visual language powerfully reinforces the thematic content. The vibrant greens and sun-drenched hues of the fertile Pride Lands sharply contrast with the desolate, monochrome hellscape of the elephant graveyard and the scorched landscape under Scar's rule, creating a clear visual shorthand for moral health and decay. The return of Nala, voiced initially by Leala Saldivia and later by Moira Kelly, forces Simba to confront his past. Her presence acts as the external catalyst, reminding him of the suffering his absence has caused. Rafiki, the wise mandrill, serves as the archetypal shaman or mentor figure. His enigmatic wisdom and the powerful scene where he compels Simba to look within, "He lives in you," is the spiritual awakening necessary for Simba to accept his lineage and duty. The final confrontation is not merely a battle for territory, but a reckoning between stewardship and selfishness. Simba's realization of his true identity allows him to reclaim his place, symbolizing the necessary cyclical renewal within nature and governance. The resolution, marked by the return of the rains and the vibrant reassertion of life on Pride Rock, reaffirms the central tenet. True strength lies not in individual dominance, but in maintaining harmony with the vast, interconnected web of existence. The film concludes by validating the difficult path of mature responsibility over the ease of childhood avoidance. The brilliance of The Lion King lies in how effectively it externalizes internal struggles through compelling character designs and evocative settings. Scar, in particular, is a masterclass in conveying moral decay through visual cues. His perpetually shadowed face, his leaner frame compared to the robust Mufasa, and his general air of indolence immediately signal his deviation from the natural order. Iron's voice work amplified this. The clipped, almost bored superiority in Scar's delivery suggests a profound intellectual vanity that masks deep insecurity. He is not merely evil, he is profoundly envious of the effortless authority his brother possessed, an authority derived from selfless leadership rather than cunning strategy. Simba's emotional arc is the film's true anchor, his youthful exuberance evident in his playful but reckless challenges to Mufasa's authority, makes his subsequent devastation following the stampede all the more impactful. The sequence where he finds Mufasa dead is handled with a rare sensitivity for a major animated feature, focusing on the crushing weight of guilt projected onto him by Scar. This manufactured guilt is the chain that binds Simba to his exile, preventing him from processing true grief. The chemistry between Timon and Pumbaa is not just filler, it represents the antithesis of the Pride Land's disciplined existence. They are survivors who have opted out of the larger struggle. Nathan Lane, known for his dynamic, often boisterous stage presence, brings an infectious, though ultimately shallow, enthusiasm to Timon, the self-proclaimed leader of the duo. Ernie Sabella's Pumbaa embodies pure, uncomplicated loyalty, his anxieties about his flatulence, providing grounding humor that prevents the philosophy of Hakuna Matata from becoming too cynical. Their dynamic offers Simba a protective bubble, insulating him from the truth of his lineage until Nala arrives, representing the world he abandoned. The visual transition when Simba returns to the desolate Pride Lands is jarringly effective. The color palette shifts entirely, mirroring the emotional state of the kingdom. The once lush savanna is depicted in muted browns and grays, the air thick with dust and despair, a direct visual representation of Scar's failed kingship. This barrenness emphasizes the thematic point that selfishness, whether personal or political, inevitably leads to environmental and societal collapse. Rafiki's role extends beyond simple mentorship. He is the bridge between the spiritual realm, Mufasa's wisdom channeled through the stars, and the physical world Simba inhabits. His almost manic energy and cryptic pronouncements force Simba out of his self-pitying stasis. When Rafiki strikes Simba on the head, it is not an act of aggression, but a sudden, sharp reminder that the past is real and must be faced, not merely remembered as a ghost. This moment is less about receiving answers and more about accepting the mandate to seek them himself. The visual composition of the clouds forming Mufasa's face is one of the most enduringly powerful moments in animated cinema, transforming a memory into an active, guiding presence. The film ultimately argues that true heroism is inherited but must be consciously earned through the rejection of escapism and the embrace of painful reality. The emotional resonance of The Lion King is deeply rooted in its exploration of responsibility, a concept visually and narratively embodied by Mufasa. Mufasa's teaching sessions with the young Simba are crucial because they frame kingship not as a right of dominance, but as an intricate system of stewardship. James Earl Jones's delivery imbues every lesson about the shadows where lions should not go, or the interconnectedness of life and death, with the weight of ancestral legacy. This contrasts sharply with Scar's methodology, which is purely transactional and ego-driven. Scar views the Pride Lands as a resource to be exploited, a concept made manifest in his alliance with the hyenas, who represent chaos and consumption outside the natural order of the hunt. Scar's internal life, though never fully articulated in warm tones, pulses with a frustrated intellectualism. He is educated, perhaps even more aware of the philosophical underpinnings of kingship than Mufasa, but chooses to weaponize that knowledge for self-aggrandizement. Jeremy Irons expertly calibrates Scar's dialogue. There's a theatrical grandeur laced with a weary sarcasm, suggesting a character who has long nursed his grievances in the shadow of his more charismatic brother. His greatest failing is an inability to inspire loyalty based on love or respect. He can only command it through fear and manipulation, a brittle foundation that inevitably crumbles. Simba's period with Timon and Pumbaa is often interpreted as regression, yet it serves a vital psychological function, allowing suppressed trauma to soften. In the jungle's relative safety, Simba is allowed to be merely a lion, not a prince or a murderer in his own mind. Nathan Lane's energetic, slightly neurotic performance as Timon perfectly offsets Pumbaa's gentle giant persona. Pumbaa, whose defining characteristic is an inherent goodness despite his physical awkwardness, represents unconditional acceptance, an essential balm for the guilt-ridden Simba. This interlude is the necessary downtime before the hero re-engages with the world, highlighting that healing often requires temporary withdrawal before confrontation. The shift back to responsibility is beautifully catalyzed by the stark, almost biblical imagery of the dying Pride Lands under Scar's ruinous reign. When Simba sees his homeland reduced to scorched earth, the abstract concept of his duty becomes tangible suffering. This visual metaphor drives home the film's environmental message, that poor leadership results in ecological devastation. Nala's emergence from this wasteland acts as a mirror, reflecting Simba's dereliction of duty back at him. Her initial reaction to seeing the adult Simba is relief, quickly hardening into disbelief and anger when he refuses to return, forcing him to confront the personal cost of his self-pity. The climax on Pride Rock is staged as a mythic confrontation between the legitimate, sunlit order and the encroaching darkness. When Scar, cornered, reveals the truth about Mufasa's death, the dramatic tension peaks. This confession forces Simba to fully process the manipulation that defined his childhood. The ensuing battle is less about physical prowess. Simba is clearly stronger, and more about the moral high ground. Simba wins when he reclaims the narrative, publicly casting out the lie Scar has built his reign upon. The final shot, with the rains washing over the renewed landscape and the communal celebration of the new reign, solidifies the film's ultimate message. The health of the individual is inseparable from the health of the community, and true maturity is accepting the burden of that connection. The cyclical nature of power and legacy, so central to the film's structure, finds its most poignant expression in the ultimate fate of Scar. His destruction is not framed as a simple defeat of evil, but as a necessary purging to restore natural order. When Simba spares him, only for Scar to be immediately consumed by the hyenas he betrayed, it underscores a harsh reality of the circle of life. Those who violently disrupt the established balance ultimately become sustenance for the very forces they sought to control or ignore. The hyenas, representing the marginalized or the necessary consumers outside the direct royal purview, reclaim their place in the order through the necessary act of eliminating the failed usurper. This ending avoids a simple sentimental victory, instead reinforcing the film's commitment to a complex, sometimes brutal, ecological truth. Furthermore, the development of Kiara, though only seen fleetingly in the original, sets the stage for the thematic continuation explored in subsequent narratives, the integration of divergent philosophies. Her presence hints that the hard-won lessons of Simba's youth, the tension between freedom and responsibility, must be continuously negotiated by the next generation. Simba, having embodied the growth from reckless youth to burdened king, now faces the parental duty of imparting wisdom without stifling independence. This transition from being the student mentored by Rafiki to becoming the mentor himself completes his character arc, showing that true leadership is not a single achievement, but an ongoing process of guidance and adaptation. The film's success in transcending its genre is also attributable to its masterful use of music, where the work of Hans Zimmer blended seamlessly with the lyrical contributions of Elton John and Tim Rice. Zimmer's score is not mere background accompaniment. It functions as an emotional language unto itself. The vast, sweeping orchestral arrangements during the stampede and the epic pronouncements of Mufasa give the proceedings an operatic scale, elevating domestic drama to mythic proportions. Conversely, the light, almost jazzy rhythms accompanying Timon and Pumbaa communicate their carefree detachment from the kingdom's fate. This sophisticated oral landscape ensures that even the simpler themes, like friendship or fear, are delivered with profound emotional depth, cementing The Lion King as a modern fable, where every element, from the shadow on a villain's face to the texture of the savannah's soil, contributes to a unified and enduring statement on life, loss, and eventual restoration. The transition of Simba from reluctant heir to confident monarch is perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the film's narrative resolution, cementing its place as a profound study in maturation. Having internalized the lessons from Rafiki and the spectral guidance of Mufasa, Simba's final act of reclaiming Pride Rock is driven not by vengeance, but by restorative justice. His confrontation with Scar during the climactic storm is visually spectacular, utilizing lightning to intermittently illuminate the desperate faces of the combatants, transforming the setting into a primordial arena of ideological conflict. Simba does not seek to destroy Scar outright, mirroring Mufasa's earlier restraint, but demands the truth be acknowledged, a moral victory that precedes the physical one. The visual language accompanying Scar's downfall speaks volumes about the fragility of false authority. As the rains cease and the sun begins to break through the heavy clouds, the immediate aftermath sees the barren land begin to visibly soften, a metaphorical cleansing mirroring the purification of the kingdom's spirit. The hyenas, now left without a leader who offered them privilege over place in the order, disperse back into the shadows, their momentary ascendancy over the established hierarchy having proven unsustainable. This reinforces the idea that power built on deceit, which relies on externalizing blame and exploiting outsiders, lacks the inherent structural integrity of power earned through duty and respect for the natural flow. The return of life to the Pride Lands, signaled by the verdant explosion of color and the return of the herds, is the triumphant visual counterpart to the film's central philosophical argument. It is the payoff for Simba's personal courage. He has moved beyond the paralyzing grief of his youth, integrating his loss into his identity as a leader. This integration is visually represented when the camera focuses on Simba and Nala, presenting their new cub to the assembled kingdom. This gesture is deliberately evocative of Mufasa's opening presentation, establishing a perfect symmetry in the narrative structure. It signifies not just a new generation, but the successful completion of the cycle. The trauma has been processed, the exile overcome, and the responsibility securely passed to the next stewardship generation. The emotional weight of the final sequence rests heavily on the audience's understanding of the sacrifices made. The celebration is joyful, but it is a joy tempered by memory. The subtle nods to Mufasa, perhaps in the way Simba stands on Pride Rock, or in the gentle strength of Nala, suggest that the influence of the past rulers is not merely spiritual, as with the ghost in the clouds, but embedded in the very conduct of the present king. The film thus concludes not just with a restoration of a kingdom, but with the successful psychological restoration of its hero, proving that accepting one's lineage, however painful its history, is the only path to authentic kingship and lasting peace. The enduring power of The Lion King also stems from its subtle commentary on the nature of memory and legacy, extending beyond the immediate family dynamic. The entire film is predicated on the idea that the past is never truly past. It is merely dormant until confronted. Rafiki's insistence that Mufasa lives in you is a profound statement on inherited responsibility, suggesting that true identity is inseparable from ancestry. This concept elevates the narrative from a simple tale of succession to an exploration of existential duty. Simba must learn to carry the weight of his father's noble example without being crushed by the expectation, a balancing act that defines mature leadership across all human endeavors. Even the seemingly minor characters contribute significantly to this tapestry of responsibility. Zazu, the meticulous hornbill steward, embodies the anxiety of bureaucracy attempting to maintain order in the face of chaos. His constant fretfulness over protocol and Mufasa's oversight reflects the essential, if sometimes burdensome, nature of institutional memory and adherence to established rules, a necessary counterpoint to Mufasa's more intuitive, nature-based leadership. Zazu's terror under Scar's regime highlights how quickly established systems crumble when true leadership is absent, reducing the entire administrative body to sycophantic terror. The visual artistry supporting the film's themes deserves continued emphasis. The use of scale is consistently employed to assert thematic dominance. When Simba is small, the world looms large and threatening. The elephant graveyard, the vastness of the Pride Lands under the oppressive sun. As he grows, he gradually masters these spaces, culminating in the final scene where he stands atop Pride Rock, his silhouette powerful against the dawn. This visual evolution maps perfectly onto his psychological journey from victim to agent of change. The sheer, breathtaking emptiness of the scorched plains under Scar's watch serves as a persistent visual indictment of selfishness, a landscape actively rejecting life because it has been ruled without respect for the cycle that sustains it. Moreover, the film skillfully manages the tension between individualism and collectivism. Timon and Pumbaa champion a radical individualism, survival at any cost, detachment from the suffering of others. While this offers Simba a necessary reprieve, the climax forces him to sacrifice that isolated comfort for the greater communal good. His final acceptance is a public vow to prioritize the well-being of the pride over his personal desire for an untroubled existence. This moral calculus, that true fulfillment, is found not in avoidance, but in integrated service, is the intellectual cornerstone that allows the film to resonate so deeply with adult audiences long after the initial spectacle of the animation has faded. It affirms that the most difficult choices, those that involve facing inherited trauma and stepping into demanding roles, are ultimately the most rewarding, completing the circle from the innocent cub to the sagacious king, who understands both the joy of life and the necessity of its inevitable transitions. The underlying genius of The Lion King is its sophisticated portrayal of guilt as a mechanism for social control. Scar's manipulation of the traumatized cub Simba is a textbook example of projecting blame, which keeps the rightful heir immobilized and passive. This manufactured guilt, an emotional anchor shackling Simba to his desolate jungle sanctuary, is far more potent than any physical restraint. The very air of the Pride Lands under Scar's nominal rule seems heavy with this suppressed sorrow and the weight of an unspoken lie, a stark contrast to the buoyant, if fleeting, freedom Simba finds in the company of his carefree companions. Timon and Pumbaa, while providing necessary comic relief, function as a compelling philosophical counterpoint to the strict tenets of the circle of life. Their philosophy, born out of necessity and a desire to sidestep the perceived cruelty of natural hierarchy, is an attractive siren song for anyone burdened by trauma. Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella deliver performances that champion a kind of joyful hedonism, Yet the film subtly critiques this stance by showing that true belonging requires facing shared hardship. Their existence is a sustainable bubble, but one that cannot sustain a kingdom. Simba's ability to embrace their friendship without letting their philosophy wholly consume him demonstrates an emerging, nuanced understanding of balance, that one can cherish fellowship while still honoring duty. The visual contrast between the Pride Lands during Mufasa's reign and Scar's tenure serves as a sustained metaphor for moral integrity versus corruption. Mufasa's kingdom basks in golden clear light, suggesting transparency and organic growth. Scar's dominion is characterized by an unnatural gloom. The landscape appears starved, the colors muted, almost bleached by neglect. This is not simply bad weather. It is the environmental manifestation of flawed ethics at the highest level. The hyenas, living in the dark crevices and operating outside the established hunting boundaries, visually reinforce the chaotic, unsustainable nature of Scar's rule, a rule built on taking without replenishing. Rafiki remains the crucial catalyst for Simba's transition back to action. His wisdom is never straightforward. It requires engagement and interpretation from Simba. The iconic moment of forcing Simba to look into the water, then to the stars, is a lesson in dual perception. Acknowledging the immediate, tangible reality of his own sorrow, the reflection, while understanding the eternal, guiding principles of legacy, the stars. This spiritual reboot is what allows Simba to reject the seductive ease of Hakuna Matata and embrace the difficult, dangerous path back home. It is the recognition that one's past self and one's ancestors are not burdens to be escaped, but rather essential components of the present self required for true leadership. The final victory is therefore as much a personal triumph over internalized fear as it is a political overthrow of a tyrant. The resolution of the central conflict hinges not just on Simba's physical strength, but on the symbolic reclamation of his voice and his narrative. When Scar attempts to pin the blame for Mufasa's death squarely on Simba in front of the assembled lionesses, he is attempting one final, desperate manipulation of the truth. Simba's response, the roaring admission and counter-accusation, is the decisive moment where the true king reasserts the ethical foundation of the Pride Lands. This public declaration shatters the illusion of Scar's legitimacy, proving that leadership derived from lies is inherently